Welcome to the show. I'm Sana Makbul, and in today's show we will be focusing on the Afghan peace process and Pakistan's role in this regard and the future of the Afghan peace process. We know that the Afghan peace process witnessed an optimistic moment when we saw that the Lower Jirga actually approved the release of the 400 captured Taliban prisoners, which was the last remaining hurdle in the intra-Afghan dialogue. But now we know that 320 still remain in custody, and concerns have risen again about the future prospects of the intra-Afghan dialogues. Meanwhile, we know that the Afghan delegation led by Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar met the the Shah Mahmood Qureshi, the foreign minister, and the ISI chief, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid. And we have heard in a post-meeting statement that the foreign minister has stated that he is very optimistic about the future of the talks. But we also know that the Taliban side has always been talking about the start of negotiations and intra-Afghan dialogue after the release of these prisoners. But it is the Afghan leadership from whose side we've been seeing that the stance keeps on changing. Meanwhile, we also know that Prime Minister Imran Khan called the Afghan peace chief, Mr. Abdullah, and he also invited him to Pakistan and also urged the Afghan leadership to seize this historic moment and actually pave the way forward for intra-Afghan dialogue and a sustainable peace in Afghanistan. So we'll see what the future holds with regards to what the Afghan leadership sees in the future in terms of actually going forward with the intra-Afghan dialogue or not, or what are their concerns, and what is it that they're hoping to achieve by slowing down the process. And we will also be taking a look, of course, at Pakistan's role in this development. We know, of course, that Pakistan was very vital in the US peace deal with the Afghanistan Taliban. And so what role is it there in the future also for Pakistan to play for inter-Afghan dialogue? To start with, we have been joined in the studio by senior analyst, Mr. Lieutenant General Retired, Mr. Talib Masood. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. Let's start with the fact that we know that there has been progress and optimism regarding intra-Afghan dialogue, which is the most important dialogue to be held regarding future peace and sustainable peace in Afghanistan. And yet, when we see the fact that initially there was this talk of releasing 400 prisoners, now there's still some hesitancy that we're seeing with the 320 still remaining. And that is something that we know that is there. It's been there in the US peace accord also, and it's been something that the Taliban have been demanding for intra-Afghan dialogue to start. And if this remains the only hurdle, why is it taking so long for the Afghan leadership to actually turn this into something tangible and a reality?
Well, actually, the problem is that there was guarded optimism. You are right in that sense. But there were also fears that there is such lack of trust between the two parties, and the way that they have fought each other for the last 19-20 years, and that has not gone away. The thing is that the Afghan leadership, as you mentioned, they had this jirga and they decided to have the prisoners released, although the Afghan government was very reluctant because some of them had committed such crimes, heinous crimes, that they thought that they should never be released
and should dangerous.
be and dangerous, and also should be punished because they had murdered several people and so on and so forth. So that was one thing. But at the same time, there was some sort of an understanding that the Taliban leadership will ensure that they will sort of reduce their militant activities and violence against the government.
That hasn't happened.
That hasn't happened. And I think that is also one of the foremost things that is acting as an obstacle in the way of peace.
But the Taliban have been saying that we're going to be talking about a ceasefire and hostilities after the talks begin. That's what their statement is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that is because of Pakistan's persuasion. But otherwise, I think they were trying to sort of use their violence in order to leverage their position and also leverage the talks, So I think that is a very wrong approach on their part as well. But Pakistan has played a very positive, always like always. But now I think Pakistan is genuinely really going all out and trying to build pressure on the Taliban leadership. Right. Having built pressure on the Taliban leadership during these last 4 days, once again,
I think
really got some assurances from them, and based on those assurances, I think it's very much possible that the Pakistan government is also conveying the same to the Afghan government, and this is why they also want.
But sir, what sort of reassurances can they possibly give at this moment? What are the reassurances that the Taliban can give?
That we will reduce our violence. We
Okay.
will not, commit such murders all the time. We will not kill the Afghan armed forces or civilians. So I think that is the major hurdle and obstacle. So I think this is the assurance that they have given to Pakistan, and Pakistan feels that this time they will they have committed themselves and they will honor their commitment.
But the condition of the release of the 320 remaining prisoners still remains, though. Even if they do have a reduction in violence or they do minimize the hostilities, they'll still want the release of those 320 prisoners before they actually start talking. No?
Well, I think they will release them provided there is a definite assurance on the part that there would be a sort of a ceasefire and the talks will resume. And I think President Afghan Ghani is very keen that he should have some sort of a leverage, and he thinks if he completely releases all the prisoners, then he will have no leverage whatsoever, and then they will be able to dictate their own terms. So I think this is also a consideration. So that is why he wants some definite assurance, either by the Americans or by the Taliban leadership, that unless there would be a forward movement, I'm not going to really release.
And he has come far from the initial statement that he gave after the US peace deal, that they were not even involved in this discussion. They're not bound by this accord to begin with.
And I think one point before we go to the next, I think the Americans are also, of course, playing a very, very critical and crucial role. And they must have assured the Afghan government that in case they don't honor the commitment, then we will also make sure that we stay on, or we...
Mike Pompeo has said it categorically that they are going to make sure that the Taliban are bound by their commitments. We would also like to welcome in the show Afghan affairs expert, Ms. Amina Khan. Thank you very much for joining us. She's on Skype with us.
Thank you.
Right. So, Ms. Amna, we were speaking about the fact that, of course, we've seen that many prisoners have been released by the Afghan side. Only 320 remain. There have been some talks that maybe the Afghan leadership is actually slowing down the process in the hope of the fact that maybe in the next US elections, if Joe Biden wins, there might be a slowing down of the US troop withdrawal. There are hopes that maybe Kabul is looking towards that. What would you think about that?
Well, let me just begin by adding to what General Talat Masood said. You see, I think there's a major responsibility on the Afghan Taliban to deliver when it comes to their front. Now, while the agreement was signed with the Americans, there was a clause that the Taliban would not attack international forces, which they haven't been doing. But unfortunately, they continue to attack Afghan national security forces, which I think is no longer justifiable. Because do remember, at the end of the day, the Taliban's insurgency was based on the liberation of Afghanistan and, foreign withdrawal, which entailed killing foreign forces. So now I think they no longer can justify their violence against the Afghan national security forces, because at the end of the day, innocent Afghans are being killed. And while we have seen, small brief periods, such as a 3-day ceasefire from 2018 during Eid and very recently as well, I think the Taliban have to push on that front and deliver, because, violence is not an option. And I think this will be a better opportunity for the Taliban to showcase themselves, as a new stakeholder that is moving away from the previous, tag that it has always had of a militant group using violence. Apart from that, I think I just wanted to add to what was being discussed before. While having said that, the reality is that in the agreement, it was agreed that Taliban prisoners would be released, at the end of which you would have intra-Afghan talks. And the delay completely has been because President Ghani, whether we like it or not, has been throwing spanners in the works time and again. And it's not just about the release of prisoners. Do remember, even during his first tenure, he couldn't consolidate or agree with the other factions on, coming up with a consolidated list of representatives for the initial intra-Afghan talks. So time and again, I feel that, the hurdles have been coming from, Kabul. And whether they like it or not, an agreement has been signed, and for them to move forward, both sides will have to exhibit and showcase a number of compromises. And I feel that the prisoner release, again, as you mentioned, has not been completely, it's not completed, and there are still a certain number of prisoners that need to be released, and therefore I feel that Kabul should move forward on this front, because let us remember, the day the Afghans sit together, that is Kabul and the Taliban, that is when the actual peace process will start. That is actually the beginning. The agreement between the Americans and the Taliban was, if you think about it, not it's just symbolic. Unless and until these two sides do not sit together and talk about complex issues, this issue is not going to be resolved.
Of course, there's no peace process without intra-Afghan dialogue, that's for sure. I'd also like to welcome the former ambassador, Mr. Shahid Kiani, with us, who's joined us on telephone line. Can you hear me, sir?
It's a pleasure. It is a pleasure being on your show, and I wish Faisal Rahman the very best as he recovers from maybe he seems to be not he's not well. So
right. Thank you very much. We hope the same. Okay, so we were talking about the fact that when we're looking at the Taliban side, and we're looking at the fact that perhaps they should also try to reduce hostilities, and there should be a reduction in violence before we can go towards intra-Afghan dialogue, and perhaps Pakistan is also trying to convince the Taliban towards a reduction in hostilities. How do you see this whole process in terms of the fact that when we're expecting the Taliban side to reduce hostilities, we're also expecting the Afghan leadership to release the prisoners, but it seems that each is waiting for the other to happen first?
First of all, you see, Pakistan is proved to be a very good, what you call, trustworthy interlocutor. And because earlier, even before the talks had begun at Doha, the Taliban leadership was in Pakistan, and the talks were led by the foreign minister, honorable foreign minister. And even now, when things are in a stalemate, the intra-Afghan talks are in a stalemate because of the problems of prisoners. If you look at the foreign prisoner, I will come to you later on. If you look at that, there is an issue with that. But the fact is that Pakistan, they have come here and they have opened their hearts to Pakistan. If you look at the news reports, the foreign minister has advised the Taliban leadership to become a little flexible and not to become too rigid, because the fact of the matter is regional peace for Pakistan, the stability in Afghanistan is absolute crucial. We have suffered in the last 2 decades since the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan till today because of the continuing civil war in Afghanistan. People don't understand. Yes, U.S. is the occupying force at this time, trying to. But the fact is that there is a civil war going on in Afghanistan, which has serious ramifications for Pakistan. Pakistan's security is at stake because of what's happening. These people from Afghanistan, they come and attack Pakistan, the TTP and other insurgents. So it's important. The fact is that amongst that, the list of prisoners which the Afghan government is unwilling to release, maybe there is a possibility that there might be some criminal elements also within those people. The Taliban should be able to be a little flexible on that. But if, for example, in the larger interest of Afghanistan's peace, the larger interest of the people, let these prisoners be freed because the lower Jirga more or less has agreed that these people should be freed. But the issue is there are serious concerns within Afghanistan, within the what you call the liberal society, or the society which has grown since 9/11, that the Taliban, the regime of Taliban, if they become coalition partners, they reinforce, they may enforce the same policy that they have done earlier. But coming back to this, sir, I think Pakistan's advice to the Afghans is absolutely spot on. And Prime Minister Imran Khan, called to Mr. Ghani to the chief executive, is extremely important that he should come and talk to Pakistan. He has tweeted that he will be coming in the future. I do not know when. I think the sooner he comes, the better it is. Takes the advice from Pakistan, because Pakistan government will have much more to share with the Afghan government, that in the larger interest of Afghanistan, they should not sit down to talk. And the rigidity on both the sides, on the sides of the Afghan government and of Taliban, now should be set aside in the large interest of the regional peace, large interest of the people of Afghanistan who have suffered in the last 4 decades. Thousands of people have died, they have been maimed, and people are crying out for peace. And you see the burden of refugees in Pakistan. Let us not, we have been looking after them for the last two decades. I think with our own resources, I think they are yearning to go back to Afghanistan. The last thing I want to say is there are spoilers in the region, and we know who they are. For them, if peace returns to Afghanistan, then that means their whole shop which they have opened up to destabilize the region in their own interest will come to an end. So let us hope that sanity prevails on both the sides and they take advice from Pakistan and they should move on in the spirit of the Doha peace process.
Okay, so we'll come to the fact that what the spoilers are hoping to achieve from derailing this process. But when we talk about the fact that the Prime Minister has invited Mr. Abdullah to the country, how important and impactful do you think that would be, his visit to the country? He has always maintained that the rest of the prisoners should also be released. He is of the opinion that the prisoners should be released and that the intra-Afghan dialogue should start as soon as possible. So what are we hoping to gain when we invite him to the country?
First, I think we will gain his confidence, full confidence as to how the talks between the Pakistan leadership, the foreign minister, and that leadership of the Taliban, how did it go, what exactly were their demands, what were their priorities, and how can Pakistan help Afghanistan further, and what are their reservations, something that I think it is not possible for him to talk from Afghanistan.
Sure.
So, and then also a personal relationship which has been there in the past as well, but you always reinforce it and bring in new perspectives of each other when you engage, and especially at this very critical time when Abdullah Sahab is playing a very critical role as far as the peace process is concerned. He's more or less in charge of that. So I think his presence in Pakistan will also give a message to the Taliban that, you know, the Afghan government is very keen to engage with the Taliban leadership.
And they are serious about this talk as well, which is a concern because how they have changed stances in the past deepens the mistrust that already exists between the two sides.
That is, actually you have said it. The real problem is that there is in these 20 years or 19 years, there is a complete distrust between the two sides. So you have to build bridges and you have to understand and look at the picture, at a broader picture, and see that what is the future of Afghanistan. For this, their leadership must understand they cannot continue to destroy Afghanistan. It is already, you know, the people have suffered so much. I don't think there are many countries in the world where the people have suffered as much as in Afghanistan. And we have full support, sympathy and support for them. And Pakistan also, as has been described many a times, has been seriously affected as a consequence of the conditions in Afghanistan. So Pakistan has also a direct vested interest in it.
Absolutely, you have a lot to gain.
Yeah. So everyone has to gain, provided there is peace. So I think wisdom should prevail and sanity should prevail, and also pragmatism should be there. There must be flexibility on the part of both the sides. So I think Pakistan is likely to play that role.
Absolutely. Ms. Amna, the fact is that of course there has been a lot of mistrust on both sides, and the way that the Afghan leadership has been acting is not helping. We understand that of course President Ashraf Ghani has moved a long way from initially when he wasn't even releasing any prisoners, and now we're down to the last 320. But the fact remains that of course there has been allegations of attacks on prisoners who were released before as well. Then we've seen that initially all of the prisoners were supposed to be released, and then the last 400 became a bone of contention, and now we're also talking about the last 320. And the Afghan officials have talked about the fact that there are security concerns and that there is also pressure from foreign governments such as from Australia or France. How do you see these reasons being cited, and how real do you think these concerns are by the Afghan leadership, thinking about the cost of the innocent lives that is going on as more and more time goes by?
Look, unfortunate as it is, thousands have been killed in this war. And again, this is no justification for the Taliban, but many Afghans have been killed as a result of, what it's called collateral damage because of, um, airstrikes by not only NATO but the US. So unfortunately, in war, people are killed. But to use this justification, again, as I said in the beginning, I just feel is just creating an unnecessary hurdle. The fact that an agreement has been signed, and again, an agreement that entails the complete release of prisoners, therefore, it needs to be honored. And here I think the
But of
US
course,
needs
there's
to
this argument
intervene.
that the Afghan government wasn't involved in that agreement. And the fact that they're
That is
honoring it
true.
this much seems to be a favor.
No, you're right. It wasn't, they were not involved completely, but the fact is that they have agreed to release the prisoners.
Sure.
So the fact that
Yes.
they cannot go halfway. And also, the day the agreement was signed between the Americans and Kabul, sorry, between the Americans and the Taliban, then therefore, the regime in Kabul then should have stepped forward and said, we do not recognize the agreement at all. The fact is the
Right.
agreement has been signed, and let's be very honest, at the end of the day, the affairs are being run by the Americans, and therefore Kabul does not have any other choice. And another point that I want to raise is that the deal in itself, there are many problems in the deal. But isn't it a better option than actually the continuation of war? It's going to be nearly 19 years of bloodshed, which has achieved nothing. And this is something that Pakistan has been saying from day one, that the only way to achieve some sort of stability, I'm not talking about peace, some sort of stability is through a political dialogue and of course national reconciliation. And here I just want to mention that while we are always talking about the external challenges to the peace process, very little attention is given to the internal or the national challenges, which in my opinion continue to be the greatest hurdles in the peace process. And time and again
Right.
we've seen this from Kabul. Many people within the regime in Kabul openly oppose the Taliban, let alone do they want to share, power with the Taliban. So therefore, I think hopefully, if the intra-Afghan talks do take place, political and national reconciliation, these are issues that need to be discussed, particularly social healing. The country has been at war with each other for such a long time that these are critical factors. And I think this, again, as I said in the beginning, is just the beginning. There are going to be a number of hurdles now because this is the face time where both sides are going to sit face to face, if at all. So I think we have to show and exhibit patience because it's a very complex process. And again, 19 years is a long time. So I don't think we should expect, that a magic wand all of a sudden, peace is going to be achieved. Not at all.
Right. And you have raised a very pertinent point, of course, because the fact remains that once the talks actually start, that's when the real trouble actually starts. And the fact, though, how exactly are we looking for a political future in Afghanistan and how is that settlement going to be achieved is a real question. We'll come to that just a bit. I'd like to talk to Mr. Shahid Kiani again. Are you still with us, Mr. Shahid?
Yes, I'm online. I'm sorry, my apologies.
Right.
That
No, that's okay. When we were earlier talking about the fact that Mr. Shah Mahmood Qureshi has also said that the peace process must continue despite spoilers, and we know that there are regional spoilers who perhaps do not really want the Afghan peace process to continue. Considering the fact that Pakistan, of course, has a very vital role to play in the Afghan peace process and is really involved in how this goes forward, what sort of foreign policy actions are we seeing Pakistan take, considering also the fact that Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship also seems a little shaky at times?
You are absolutely right. Our relations with Afghanistan have not been of the optimum level of desired level, as we say, and there have been serious, I would say at times mistrust between Pakistan and Afghanistan, more on their side than on ours. And I tell you why. Many a times the Afghan leadership who has visited Pakistan, or our leadership, military and political leadership, visited Afghanistan, and they make certain commitments, and then those commitments are not adhered to. This is a very sad thing. But nevertheless, we would, since Pakistan wants, and you see, it wants stability and peace in Afghanistan, because that also has an impact on Pakistan. You also understand the suffering of the people of Afghanistan. We would like to see an intra-Afghan discussion, because at the end of the day, it will be Afghanistan themselves. Only that agreement, that negotiated settlement can be enforced in Afghanistan, which is between the various factions of Afghanistan and not by others. Pakistan can only convey a message from one, like Taliban, to the Afghan government. The rest of it we cannot do. We cannot enforce that thing. We can only convey that this is what they want, this is what their desire is, and then the Afghan government. The rest we have to leave it to the Afghanistan. We should encourage the Afghans to sit down and talk to each other. Our foreign policy has been, we are committed. We would like a stable Afghanistan because, let me be honest, people look at 9/11. No, we have to look at 1979. We have suffered in the last more than 4 decades. The bomb blast, the drug, the terrorism issue, all entered Pakistan since 1979. Before that,
Right,
this
of
was
course.
peaceful Pakistan. We're not blaming anybody, but I've been to Afghanistan. I can tell you what people of Afghanistan say. They say we have suffered more when the civil war took place than when the Soviet troops were in Afghanistan. So this is the crux of the matter is, you see, let sanity prevail. Let the people in Afghanistan, the leaderships and the Taliban, sit down and talk to each other and put an end to all this agony.
Right. Mr. Talat, what do you think in terms of the fact that we have had problems with the Afghan leadership and in terms of border skirmishes also, or we of course have the major refugee problem that exists. How does this, or does it hamper our role as a facilitator in the Afghan peace process in the future? I mean, we need to also have to be in line with the Afghan leadership, right?
Well, I think Pakistan has tried its best, but there is an Indian influence and a very strong Indian influence. Then it is also true that, when there is a small neighbor and there is a relatively a larger country, like, Pakistan in relation to Afghanistan is a bigger country, is a larger country, has more resources. And so there is always, and then they are also, landlocked. So there is a sort of a psychological effect as well,
Right.
that they think that Pakistan tries to dominate Afghanistan. Pakistan has been trying to sort of in a way run Afghanistan. This has been the general impression on the part. And then obviously the way that things went during 9/11 and even before that, Afghan Jihad and all that. So Pakistan's involvement in Afghanistan was very deep and wide.
Sure.
So I think all these things had a negative impact on Afghanistan's leadership. And then to make it worse, the Indians have really, in a way, made it their policy to ensure that there is lack of trust between the Afghan leadership and Pakistan.
Right.
But Pakistan over the last several years, and now especially, has made every effort towards trying to build confidence between the two countries. And it is also making so obvious to them that it is in the vital interest of Pakistan to have peace in Afghanistan or stability in Afghanistan, whatever you want to say.
Right. And plus the US has also made it clear
Yeah,
that Pakistan is vital.
You see, and look at the change of attitude by the US itself. Previously, they also used to sort of blame game, because you see, when you are failing, when you are a failed state or something, when you are in turmoil, you don't want to take the blame yourself. So you say all your problems are because of your neighbor.
Right.
So I think that was also like passing the buck on to Pakistan. But Pakistan has taken that as I would say, in a sportsman's spirit. And
it has
not,
changed now.
yeah. But now I think there is a greater realization on the part of Afghan leadership and of course the American leadership as well, and the world, that Pakistan is genuine about peace in Afghanistan. And the fundamental thing is that Pakistan's own interest, as I said, I even use the word vested interest, although I mean it's a larger interest of Pakistan, that we want peace in Afghanistan, because without peace in Afghanistan, we just cannot have peace in Pakistan.
Right.
Then we want at least our western border to be peaceful. Our eastern border is already under pressure. So all circumstances go towards Pakistan pursuing a policy which Afghan leadership and the world must understand, that Pakistan is genuine about bringing peace to, and will do everything possible. Then there is another aspect, I think, which we cannot overlook. Pakistan is interested, as far as I can see, that Afghanistan is also democratic. The will of the people is expressed in the form of government, whichever government comes there, so that there is continuity and there is a stable government. Pakistan does not want a government which is, very backward and living in the.
And perhaps the US also doesn't.
No, US also doesn't, and I think by and large the people who are forward looking and who want a prosperous Afghanistan,
They don't.
a stable Afghanistan would like that.
But then that's actually the real question,
Then-
because when we're looking at
Yeah.
the political future of the country, then it remains to be seen what sort of
What's,
agreement
exactly,
is actually going to come out of any intra-Afghan dialogue, because
But I think what is happening is that the Taliban leadership is also realizing that they have to really be in connaissance with the rest of the world. They can't be completely, out of this world and
they
live
seem
in the,
far different than the Taliban we
Yeah,
know of
that is
20 years
different,
ago,
that
for sure.
you don't expect them to become all of a sudden very
Right.
modern, and that is perfectly all right. They can be traditional, they can be conservative, all that is perfectly fine. But they also have to realize that how the world has moved and what are the requirements of moving with this world, and in the interest of Afghanistan, in the interest of the people of Afghanistan, in the interest of peace of this region, they have to also change.
Right.
And I think Pakistan has played a very major role in trying
making-
to sort of impress upon them. And I think this 10 years of Mullah Baradar in Pakistan has also sort of enlightened him, although he was a very good, very able, very experienced leader of theirs and very moderate leader of theirs. But I think his stay in Pakistan has also been transformational. This is my
Own opinion.
understanding.
Sure,
yeah.
of course. Ms. Amna, when we talk about the fact that, of course, the Taliban side perhaps has changed from what we know from 10, 20 years ago, and they might be more forward-looking right now. We still know, of course, that there is going to be a problem, like you said earlier, as well, in terms of actually what sort of a system politically are they actually looking for, and what sort of guarantees or fundamental rights will they actually be providing to the people of Afghanistan. And when we talk about the discussion with the Afghan leadership, then what sort of power sharing agreement will actually come forward, if at all. So considering the fact that the Taliban haven't really been very obvious regarding what sort of system they're looking for, they have been vague considering what sort of system they are going to bring forward if they do come into power. What do you think can we be expecting from the new Taliban?
Okay, just before I answer that, I'd just like to say that, while the peace process, it does provide Afghanistan and Pakistan certainly with an opportunity to, improve ties. At the same time, I feel that, the peace process should not dictate the Pak-Afghan relationship. And we've all seen that for far too long, the outcome of the peace process and, of course, the situation in Afghanistan has dictated the Pak-Afghan relationship, which, to be quite honest with you, has been counterproductive. And hence you've had these, I think these expectations that certainly couldn't be fulfilled completely from Pakistan, and this, vicious blame game that really hasn't benefited both sides. So while, of course, Pakistan should continue to support the peace process, I think it should be limited, because at the end of the day, it is for the Afghans, no matter how difficult it is, but the Afghans will have to take ownership, and they will have to chalk out their differences and come to some sort of a conclusion themselves. Now, having said that, you're right, so far, very little to no progress, let alone discussion, has been made on, what kind of a future political setup Afghanistan will have post-intra-Afghan talks. Now, this is, I think, another issue that should have been addressed when the agreement was signed with the Americans. Therefore, I feel that now it is essential that, issues related to the constitution, the rights of women, and etc., should not only need to be discussed but agreed upon in the intra-Afghan talks, because if they're not, then it's going to be an exercise in futility, as we saw in the previous agreement. Now, while you did say, yes, the Taliban, look, it's very difficult for us to assess what the Taliban mean and what they're going to actually do in practice, because whatever we have seen of the Taliban isn't something that we favor. But the Taliban, I think, have been forced to realize that they cannot operate the way they did, say, 2 decades ago. And that is why you have statements coming from the Taliban. And by the way, they have been very open in what they envisage for the future of Afghanistan. And this they exhibited in the Moscow talks, where Abbas Tanakzai very openly said that they were open to a power sharing setup, and they did not believe in a monopoly of power. And they have been engaging with women delegations, which of course is very limited. Women need to be a part of the intra-Afghan talks, which they've been completely sidelined. But the Taliban have been engaging with them, and the Taliban have said that they're open to the role of women in public life. They've talked about when they talk about the constitution, Abbas Tanikzai, Sohail Shaheen, they talk about Afghan nationalism. They talk about human rights. And these issues were alien to the Taliban that we know 2 decades ago. Now, I know while whatever comes out of the Taliban's mouth is, of course, it comes with a fair amount of suspicion. The fact is that if the Taliban are talking about these issues and they're addressing them means that, certain changes are coming about. And let's be honest, the Taliban and, the leadership, or at least the political office, is sitting in Doha, their families are with them. So the fact that if they're sitting in Doha with their families, certainly they cannot say that, women don't have a right to do whatever and whatever. So these are important issues that need to be addressed. And again, if the Taliban do come into some sort of a power sharing agreement, then of course it is for regional stakeholders as well as the Americans to ensure that all sides fulfill their sides of the agreement. And again, this is very difficult, but certain measures need to be put in place for all the sides to deliver on their front. And again, it's easy for us regional countries to talk, but again, I keep on reiterating, unless and until these two sides do not sit face to face and chalk out their differences, we will continue to discuss the future of Afghanistan like this.
Right. Mr. Shahid Kiani, what do you think is the future that the Afghan people want? At the end of the day, if we're looking for peace in Afghanistan, we're looking for peace in terms of the people of Afghanistan and what they define peace to be and what sort of a government or political system they want to come out of talks between the Afghan leadership and the Taliban. So what sort of peaceful political future do the Afghans see? And is that possible through intra-Afghan dialogue?
Let me say, whatever we have been reading since 9/11 till today, especially the last few years, Afghanistan, by and large, has now a changed society. I do not think even for a minute that the people of Afghanistan, majority of the Afghans, would like to go back to the regressive policies of the Taliban. Let me be honest. I think the Afghanistan has changed. They have seen what liberty can bring to them, what education especially, the improvement in the social sector, health and education can bring to them. I'm not saying that this government or the government of Karzai were ideal governments, not the least. But the fact is that the infusion of American, money and the development partners have brought about a fundamental change in the Afghan society. So people in Afghanistan are yearning to continue with this, rather to develop on this, the improvement in their lives, the education, the health, and especially what education can bring about to them, the women's rights especially. So Taliban, the only concern fear is, what have the Taliban, the leadership has promised to the foot soldiers? What side of Afghanistan would that be? Because if people are thinking that they're going to change 90 degrees turn, no, I doubt it very much.
Right.
They will be, because the change has to come from their minds. What kind of Afghanistan do they want? So, if the Taliban are serious about a peaceful Afghanistan, then they will have to be flexible, and they will have to, reconciliation. They have to sit across the table, listen to the other side also. What side of Afghanistan do they want? It will be a compromise between what the Afghan Taliban, because they are a serious stakeholder in the whole political process of Afghanistan, and those who are in their opposition. So let us hope sanity prevails. Both the sides sit together for their own, first of all, priorities for Afghanistan to come to peace for themselves and for the region. Especially, it's extremely important for Pakistan that stability and peace returns to Afghanistan, because a lot of things which are waiting for us, the gas pipelines from Central Asia, the peace process, the security in Pakistan, the security of the border, because we have continue to suffer. Look at in the Waziristan area, our security forces are still fighting these what you call elements who are trying to destabilize Pakistan.
Right. Thank you very much. We're short of time. Mr. Shahid Kiani and Ms. Amna Khan, thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to say goodbye to you for now. And my last question would be to you, sir. The fact is that, of course, whatever sort of agreement that we will see in the future, hopefully, when intra-Afghan dialogues begin, and that if we do come towards a political future of Afghanistan, like Mr. Shahid and Ms. Amna was saying, that it is going to be a sort of a compromise or a middle ground between what the Afghan leadership perhaps aspires and what the Taliban were looking towards if they were only alone in power, and if we are going towards a power sharing agreement. So considering that, and considering the fact that when we talk about the Western democratic or liberal ideals, especially with regards to women's rights or other rights, then how do you think the world community is going to be engaging with Afghanistan in the future? Is that sort of a government or system that is going to come into play, the kind of Afghanistan that emerges, is going to be good enough for the international community to engage with politically, economically, or otherwise?
You know, if there is a compromise and some sort of a government comes which has a reasonable sort of, there is a cooperation between the two major parties. I think the international community will definitely be very helpful.
Okay.
Because it has always been very helpful towards Afghanistan. It feels extremely, I think, grieved over what Afghanistan has gone through and has great sympathy and support for Afghanistan. It has been supporting Afghanistan for the last 19 years and would continue to do that. And then, of course, to rebuild Afghanistan, the international community, or for that matter, Americans, will not have to spend that much of money.
Right.
The
of
real
course. Far less than what they've spent.
Far less. The real problem was that the Americans had to spend so much of money, not so much on Afghanistan, but on their military and presence there. And so was the case with NATO. So I think this money could be, if there is peace, this money could be very well spent on the Afghan people and rebuilding Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is in tatters at the moment. And so I think
Do you think that's going to happen, though? Do you think that the money will be spent?
Well, I would say that then, of course, the responsibility would be, even if the money starts coming to them, and they will have to spend it in a way in which they could really build Afghanistan, because there has also been a lot of corruption, which is understandable in a situation like this. And then, of course, drug trafficking and smuggling and so on and so forth, all the ills that were there because of lack of governance will have to also be brought under control.
Absolutely.
And so we are wishing the best for Afghanistan, but the challenge is great, and we are really looking forward that the Afghans have a change of mind, and their leadership, both the government as well as the Taliban, will think that their future is really the future of generations, of the next generations of Afghan people.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us today. And of course, there is so much effort that is required to actually rebuilding Afghanistan. We have numerous problems in the country to making sure that the lives of the people of Afghanistan is better in the future. And all that can only happen once we actually reach a peace deal. And so the start of intra-Afghan dialogue is extremely important. Pakistan has been playing its role, and it will do so in the future as well. But of course, the responsibility still remains on the Afghan leadership and the Taliban to make sure that they do everything possible in actually helping the start of intra-Afghan dialogue and moving towards peace in Afghanistan. That is the hope. It's goodbye for now. Thank you for watching.